Hello, my name is Delphine, and it's true. My own sibling, at our mother's reading of the will, deliberately humiliated me in front of everyone. She publicly labeled me the family's biggest disappointment, flashing a cruel smile, as if my existence was a mere afterthought, a trivial detail. However, what she didn't realize was that our mother had completely rewritten her will. They believed they had successfully buried the truth. But what if the truth had been interred with me, alive, patiently waiting, and possessing irrefutable evidence? Stay with me, because what transpired subsequently didn't just silence a room, it brought down a legacy meticulously crafted on a foundation of deception. I received only 2 days' notice, a crisp, white envelope, bearing elegant embossed lettering and the aroma of aged paper, arrived at my apartment in Charlotte 2 days prior to the will reading. No phone call, no prior warning, just the letter, resting on my doorstep like a blatant provocation. Calliope had assured me she would keep me informed. That promise was made 2 weeks earlier, at the funeral. A funeral she meticulously orchestrated, dictating even the hue of the lilies and issuing a press release to the Alumni Association. I barely had a moment of private farewell with my mother, and now this Miss Delphine Marin. As if I were a mere guest at someone else's lavish celebration. I didn't even shed a tear. I simply rose, carefully refolded the scarf, and commenced packing lemon polish and lavender soap. Then Calliope's new assistant emerged, tall, with a perpetually sullen expression, oozing an air of privileged disdain. She stared at me as though I had arrived prematurely to a party to which I hadn't been invited. "I wasn't aware you were attending," she remarked. "I was invited," I replied, simply presenting the envelope as a shield. She sniffed disdainfully. "Well, everyone else is on the patio, garden attire is required." Naturally. They looked as though they had stepped straight out of a country club catalog. Aunt Dolores greeted me with a warm smile and a gentle embrace, her arms trembling slightly. "Oh, Delphine darling. I'm so relieved you're here. Your mother would have been too." "I hope so," I replied softly. Everyone else studiously avoided my gaze except for Calliope. She turned the instant I stepped onto the flagstone path, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. "Well, look who deigned to grace us with their presence." I didn't realize they were permitting +1s at the will reading. The atmosphere shifted palpably. A few polite, strained chuckles rippled through the group, but mostly, silence reigned. I remained silent. I had learned long ago that Calliope thrived on eliciting reactions. Deny her that, and you deprive her of oxygen. I took a seat at the far end of the long table beneath the striped awning. I didn't belong to their exclusive circle, not with my simple flats and inexpensive dress from a discount store, but I was present, and that, in itself, held significance. As I settled in, my gaze fell upon the hydrangeas bordering the stone wall, their vibrant blue hues seeming to bloom defiantly. I inhaled deeply, flashbacks assaulting my memory. Calliope receiving a brand new car at 16, while I struggled to scrape together bus fare, her abandoning college because she felt entitled to a break, while I toiled at 3 jobs to afford my education. I was the daughter they barely tolerated, I whispered to myself, the one they always expected to remain silent. But not this time. Just as the lawyer appeared from the French doors, I witnessed it. Calliope, seated opposite me, reached into her designer handbag. She withdrew a folded piece of paper, glanced around surreptitiously, and slid it under the table towards the man beside her, Uncle Reginald. The action was swift, smooth, practiced, but I had seen it. And in that instant, I understood this wouldn't be a mere recitation of names and assets. It was a carefully orchestrated setup. The room's ambiance altered drastically the moment Mr. Fitzwilliam entered through the sunroom's glass doors. Conversation ceased abruptly. The clinking of coffee spoons against porcelain plates halted mid-action. Even the air seemed different, heavy with anticipation. I remained motionless, hands folded neatly in my lap, feigning obliviousness to my sister's clandestine maneuver. Mr. Fitzwilliam cleared his throat and offered a polite nod. "Thank you all for attending. I understand this is a challenging time, and I will endeavor to be concise and respectful." Calliope rose from her plush chair as if auditioning for a dramatic soap opera, her face meticulously composed in an expression of solemn dignity. She moved to stand beside the lawyer, placing a hand on his arm as if they were old acquaintances. "Let's just hope this isn't one of Delphine's surprises," she remarked, letting out a sharp, cutting laugh. The ensuing silence wasn't supportive. It was fraught with tension, a tacit agreement that no one would dare challenge her. I felt my cheeks flush, but I refrained from responding. I would allow her her moment of triumph. Mr. Fitzwilliam blinked slowly, as if her comment had taken him aback, but he proceeded. He opened his briefcase with deliberate care, as if delaying the inevitable might make the next part easier. "We shall commence by confirming attendance," he announced. "Delphine, If you would be so kind, this is simply a form acknowledging your presence and your understanding of the proceedings. He handed me a single sheet of paper with a glossy blue header and a blank signature line. I frowned. Just me? Mr. Fitzwilliam nodded. Yes, merely a formality. To my left, Aunt Dolores shifted in her seat and leaned closer. They didn't request my signature last time, she whispered, more to herself than to me. Her voice was soft yet unwavering. I examined the document. It was printed on Mr. Fitzwilliam's firm's letterhead, but something felt amiss. There were no specific details listed, only a title, some legal jargon, and that signature line. I require a copy of this, I stated quietly. Calliope's husband, Bartholomew, the epitome of quiet compliance, shifted slightly. For a moment, I thought he might speak, but of course, he didn't. Mr. Fitzwilliam nodded again and retrieved the form, carefully placing it back into his briefcase. Certainly, sunlight streamed through the arched windows behind him, casting pale golden streaks across the carpet. A gentle breeze stirred the sheer curtains, carrying a faint trace of Calliope's perfume, something expensive, pungent, and floral. She tilted her head, her eyes cool and playful. Delphine was the most attentive daughter, wasn't she? No one responded, she continued, especially after Mom became ill. All those late-night calls, the frequent visits. She made Mom feel so guilty, as if it wasn't enough, you know? Her tone was light, yet the weight of her words landed like a stinging slap. She didn't state it explicitly, but she painted me as a manipulative individual, in a single breathy sentence. I avoided looking at her. Instead, I reached for the scarf in my bag, that old silk square with my mother's initials embroidered in faded thread. I held it tightly in my palm. Mom in hospice care, frail as paper, her hand trembling as she pressed the scarf to her chest, her voice barely audible above a whisper. Don't let them take everything. I had nodded through tears, not fully comprehending her meaning. Now, seated in this room, dressed for a genteel southern brunch, I understood perfectly. This wasn't merely about inheritance. It was about erasure. Mr. Fitzwilliam cleared his throat again. If we are all prepared, I shall commence reading the last will and testament of Maribel Wainwright. He surveyed the room, then paused, his gaze settling directly upon me. You may wish to be seated for this. The sunroom had fallen silent, yet the stillness was palpable, the kind of silence that buzzed in your ears. I barely registered my own breath as Mr. Fitzwilliam adjusted his spectacles, cleared his throat, and unfolded the document before him. With deliberate slowness, he began reading the will in a tone that attempted, unsuccessfully, to sound routine. Per the last legally witnessed and notarized testament, he stated, the entirety of the Wainwright estate, encompassing the property, monetary assets, personal belongings, and residual income, is hereby bequeathed to Delphine Wainwright. A glass shattered behind me. I didn't even bother to turn around to identify the culprit. All I heard next was a sharp intake of breath, someone muttering, "You've got to be kidding." Calliope's hand, which had been resting casually on the table, shot upward, knocking over her meticulously placed water glass. Her composed expression crumbled. "What?" she gasped. Mr. Fitzwilliam didn't flinch. "That is precisely what the document stipulates." Aunt Dolores's lips parted slightly, but she remained silent. I sat frozen, unsure if I had heard correctly. My name, everything. Then came the anticipated pause. However, Mr. Fitzwilliam stated, his voice tightening, "There is a clause." Of course there was. He held up another sheet of paper and continued, "The inheritance is contingent upon Miss Wainwright maintaining the family estate, residing within it, and preserving its functionality for a minimum of 1 year. During this period, no sale, redevelopment, or transfer of property rights is permitted." He glanced briefly at Calliope, then back at me. "In addition, Miss Calliope Wainwright is to be prohibited from initiating or facilitating any structural changes, financial reassessments, or sale discussions concerning the estate during this period." My stomach lurched. I couldn't discern whether it was from shock or from the sheer weight of the clause's implications. "This is a joke," Calliope snapped, rising so abruptly that her chair scraped backward. "That's not what Mom intended." She turned on me like a viper. "You planted that idea in her head, didn't you? All those calls near the end, feigning distress about being excluded, playing the martyr while I managed everything." "Calliope," Aunt Dolores interjected, but was swiftly silenced. No, they need to hear this," she snapped, addressing the few distant cousins and family acquaintances lingering near the rear. She didn't even visit for years. Then, suddenly, when Mom fell ill, She's at her bedside like Florence Nightingale, rewriting history. I kept my eyes fixed on the tablecloth. I could feel every muscle in my back, tensing, resisting the urge to curl up in shame. But shame for what? She manipulated her into this, whispering to her in the darkness. She didn't even cry at the funeral. I didn't flinch, not because it didn't sting, but because I knew that if I shed a single tear, she would twist it into proof. Mr. Fitzwilliam interjected. Miss Wainwright, these terms were written directly by your mother, in her own hand. The will was signed in the presence of a notary and 2 independent witnesses. She was confused. Calliope retorted. She had begun to become disoriented. You said so yourself, Dolores. I said she was fatigued, my aunt murmured, not confused. For a moment, silence descended. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting soft shadows across the floor. It was ironic how serene everything appeared in a room brimming with hostility. Did she leave? Anything else? I asked softly, my voice sounding as if it emanated from somewhere outside my body. Mr. Fitzwilliam hesitated, then reached into his briefcase, producing a sealed envelope. She did. She left this for you, Delphine. I accepted it with both hands. The envelope felt heavy, containing more than just paper. It held something weighty, almost sacred. I turned it over, breaking the seal. Inside, a single folded page bore my name at the top. My mother's familiar script, her characteristic loops and slants stretched across the page in slightly faded blue ink. It began gently, an apology cloaked in grace, but within a few lines, she revealed something that made the entire room fade from my consciousness, something that redefined every memory I had of her. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the rustling of paper brought me back to the present. The letter felt lighter than air, yet heavier than grief. I unfolded it slowly, carefully, as if moving too quickly might cause the truth within to vanish. My mother's handwriting curved across the page, in a manner I hadn't seen since before the tremors began. Somehow, it appeared both fragile and furious. I hadn't planned to read it aloud, but I did. My voice cracked on the second sentence. To Delphine, you were there when no one else was. You prepared me soup when I could barely speak. You remained by my side when your sister filed power of attorney documents without informing me. You are the only one who didn't urge me to sell the home, only to rest within it. No one interrupted. Not yet. Even the antique grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hold its chime. I continued. The ink trembled like a whisper. I was not disoriented when I composed this. I was weary, but not confused. And I want you to know, I altered the will after she attempted to sell the house out from under me. I couldn't bear the thought of being displaced while strangers roamed our halls. I looked up. The sunroom suddenly felt colder. Calliope stood like a statue carved from resentment. One of our cousins shifted in his chair, clearly regretting his decision to attend in formal attire. The room had shifted, subtly, but enough for me to sense the weight of every eye turning towards her. I didn't do anything she didn't want, Calliope finally said, her voice strained, brittle. She was ill. Delirious. Do you think she could make that kind of decision in a hospice bed? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I stepped forward, holding the letter, and presented it to Mr. Fitzwilliam. Can you verify the date this was signed? He adjusted his glasses, leaning closer. It was witnessed by 2 members of our staff. The same day the hospice nurse documented full cognitive clarity. I possessed the supporting documentation. The color drained rapidly from Calliope's face. You pressured her, I stated quietly, not to accuse, but to assert a simple fact. You contacted a realtor while she was recovering from pneumonia. Calliope's voice rose an octave. You have no idea what she was like in the end. She was frightened, Delphine. She clung to your voice, because you told her what she wanted to hear. Aunt Dolores interjected, firm yet calm. Don't. You can spin it however you like. But I saw her with my own eyes. Your mother was more herself in those final days than she'd been in years. And you attempted to evict her from her own life. That struck harder than anything I could have said. Calliope recoiled, stung. She looked around for support, but no one moved. Even her husband kept his gaze fixed on the carpet, as if the truth was too sharp to look at directly. I turned, slowly, and walked towards the parlor's front window. The letter folded in my hands like a pressed flower, something meant to endure beyond its original form. I spoke minimally, simply stating, she didn't want to be sold like a piece of property. I honored that wish. And then, silence descended. But it wasn't the silence I had grown up with. the silence that had once induced shame, that had caused me to shrink into corners at family gatherings or pretend not to hear when my name was omitted from plans. This was different. For the first time in years, no one had anything to say to me, but the silence wasn't shame, it was fear. We moved from the sunroom to the estate's garden lounge, where brunch had been arranged as if nothing had just shattered the family. Finger sandwiches lined silver trays, mimosa pitchers, beaded with condensation on linen napkins, and someone even had the audacity to play jazz music, as if it could somehow mitigate the events that had just transpired. I sat near the far window, sipping black coffee from a delicate porcelain cup I didn't recall owning. Across the room, I observed Calliope flitting from table to table, all smiles and light laughter, as if she hadn't just been publicly stripped of her authority. She leaned in too close to some of the older guests, placing a hand on their shoulders, nodding solemnly at precisely the right moments. Damage control, that was her talent, but I had no interest in participating. The letter remained folded in my lap, the creases now warm from the heat of my hand. Aunt Dolores sat beside me, silent yet attentive. A few cousins passed by with awkward glances. Some nodded, others simply stared. But I noticed something in their eyes that hadn't been present before: recognition. Calliope's voice cut through the chatter, too loud to be casual. "Oh, Delphine always had this unique relationship with Mom," she remarked, turning to a trio of family friends who had known us since childhood. "She had a way of making herself the victim. I just wish, honestly, I just wish she hadn't taken advantage when Mom was at her weakest." One of the women, a friend of my mother's, who used to braid my hair on Sunday mornings, let out a slow, disappointed sigh. "That's despicable," she murmured, not quite under her breath. Dolores rose then, not with a shout, but calmly gathered her purse, gave me a knowing look, and exited through the French doors without uttering a word. I took a slow sip of coffee, then placed the cup back on the saucer. The quiet within me wasn't passivity, it was resolve. I stood up, not raising my voice, but cutting through the air with the sharpness of glass. "Calliope," I said clearly, "I never needed to manipulate anyone, and I possess every document to prove that." The room fell silent. Calliope turned to face me, her polished smile cracking just enough to reveal the panic beneath. "Excuse me, I retained the paperwork," I stated, folding my arms. "Emails, signed documents, timestamps, even the voicemail Mom left me after you filed the power of attorney behind her back." A hush fell like a curtain dropping mid-scene. "Do you wish to make that lie public?" I asked, steady as a rock. "Then I shall make the truth public, all of it." Someone coughed in the corner. Another guest shifted uncomfortably. People began subtly to turn their chairs in my direction. Calliope blinked rapidly, her voice sharper now. "You wouldn't." I looked her directly in the eye. "You have mistaken quietude for weakness your entire life." She didn't respond. She couldn't. The audience she believed she possessed was now listening to me. For once, I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to resort to tantrums or underhanded tactics. All I had to do was finally clearly state what I should have said 20 years ago. "You no longer have the power to silence me through shame." I didn't await her response. I returned to my seat, picked up my coffee, and allowed the room to process the information. But as I glanced up one last time, I saw it in her face. Not embarrassment, not sadness, but panic, as if she had finally realized I would no longer be her scapegoat. The brunch concluded with Calliope's smile shattered, but whatever fractured that day didn't slow her down. If anything, it made her more formidable. A week later, I found a manila envelope awkwardly lodged in my mailbox. My name was typed across the front, cold and impersonal. Inside, a court summons. It filed a motion to contest the will, claiming our mother had been under emotional duress, and that I had coerced a dying woman into rewriting her estate. The legal term she relied upon was undue influence. I stood in my entryway, rereading the words. The legal language was meticulously crafted, but the meaning was unambiguous. She was calling me a liar. I entered my home office, locked the door behind me, and reached for the bottom drawer of the old oak filing cabinet Mom and I had refinished during my graduate studies. It stuck slightly, humidity, perhaps, but I pulled it open and found what I needed. The red folder, labeled in my mother's handwriting, Supplement Addendum 3. Inside were notarized documents she had signed during her last month in hospice care. There was a complete addendum to the will, dated after her initial revision. In it she clearly stated that Calliope had attempted to seize control of her finances while she was recovering from pneumonia. There was even a letter to her estate attorney, attached with copies of bank statements. Calliope never anticipated anyone would ever see again. There were withdrawals for spa treatments, jewelry, and a down payment on a new car that wasn't recorded as a gift. I retrieved the printed emails as well. Mom had forwarded me copies, suspecting her own login had been compromised. I remembered the message clearly. "Oh, Delphine, don't delete these, just in case I forget later. You'll understand." I understood, and now I was finished allowing her memory to be rewritten by someone who only appeared when there was something to gain. By midday, I was on the phone with the legal clinic I had visited once before, back when I was assisting a friend through a conservatorship dispute. The woman on the other end of the line asked, "Do you possess supporting documentation?" "I have more than that," I replied. "I have her voice." 3 days later, I entered the county courthouse wearing pressed beige trousers and a navy blouse. Nothing flashy, simply neat, clean, and composed. I maintained a neutral expression, though the weight of the contents of my bag felt heavier than ever. Not because of what I was carrying, but because of what it represented. I encountered Calliope on the courthouse steps. She appraised me from head to toe, then whispered to her attorney, as if I were an insignificant pest she hoped to brush away. Right at the front desk, I handed the red folder to the clerk. She opened it, scanning briefly, then paused, her brow furrowed. "Is this the decedent's handwriting?" "Yes." "Witnessed, signed, notarized." She flipped through a few more pages. Her voice dropped a tone. "You might want to sit down for this one," she muttered. "Not to me." She turned to her colleague, who widened his eyes. I didn't sit. I simply signed the counter-motion papers with a steady hand and stepped aside. That evening, I sat in my home office, the lights illuminating the hardwood floors, casting a soft glow over the worn corners of old files. I looked around and finally permitted myself to breathe. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about Calliope's attempt to rewrite history. She wanted to erase the months I spent feeding Mom broth when she could barely lift a spoon, to pretend I hadn't spent nights in a chair beside her bed while the oxygen machine hissed beside us, to erase the part where I honored Mom's wish not to be moved, not to be managed. "She's not just attempting to humiliate me," I said aloud, to no one. "She's trying to erase me." But here's the thing about silence. When you allow it to build, to sharpen, to maintain its form, it cuts cleaner than shouting ever could. And this time, I wasn't hiding. She initiated a conflict over paperwork. She forgot I knew where the originals were kept. The sun hadn't fully risen when I left the house that morning, but the air already felt heavy, as if it sensed an impending storm. I parked a block away from the courthouse, opting for quietude, rather than being thrust directly into the chaos I sensed was awaiting me. As I approached the plaza, I spotted them: tripods, boom, microphones, individuals with press badges, clipped to their coats, and in the center of it all, my sister. Calliope was already mid-performance. She wore the soft lavender coat she reserved for occasions when she wanted to appear relatable. Her makeup was flawless, but her voice trembled convincingly. "I only ever tried to protect our mother," she told a reporter, her lower lip quivering slightly. "But money changes people." The reporter nodded sympathetically, making notes on a pad. "We understand your sister is expected to arrive shortly." Calliope's expression shifted momentarily, a flash of tightly controlled emotion. "Yes, I'm sure she has, her version." I paused, just out of camera range, close enough to hear every syllable, far enough to remain unnoticed. So that was her strategy: to shape the narrative before I could speak, to portray herself as the grieving daughter betrayed by a greedy sibling, to use the cameras to erase the evidence I possessed. But I was prepared. I stepped forward, my heels clicking softly against the concrete. I wasn't dressed for pity, only for truth. A charcoal suit, simple flats, hair pulled back, no frills, just facts. The crowd quieted as I approached. The lead journalist, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a coffee stain on her sleeve, turned towards me. "Miss Wainwright?" she asked. "Would you care to respond to your sister's statement?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my tote bag and produced a sealed envelope. I handed it to her without speaking. She opened it. Inside, a packet containing time-stamped screenshots, email threads, revealing Calliope's wire transfers from our mother's joint account, and a notarized letter from the hospice nurse, dated 2 months before our mother's passing. The nurse had written, "Patient expressed repeated concerns about her daughter, Calliope, accessing bank records without consent. Recommended independent oversight. Logged on file." The journalist's lips moved silently as she scanned the page, then she looked up. "Ma'am, where did you obtain this?" "My mother gave it to me," I replied. She knew this day might come. Before the journalist could respond, a voice rose from the crowd. I can confirm that. We all turned. Nurse Genevieve stood near the back, wearing her old identification badge around her neck. I was her night shift nurse. I filed a report when Miss Calliope raised her voice and waved a checkbook at her mother. She was recovering from pneumonia. She cried herself to sleep that night. Murmurs rippled through the plaza. One man cautiously retreated from Calliope. Another woman shook her head and muttered, "Disgusting." Calliope's composure faltered. This is a smear campaign," she snapped. "None of this proves manipulation." She was dying. She didn't know what she was doing. I turned to face her fully, but my voice didn't rise. She knew exactly what she was doing. She changed her will after you attempted to place her in an assisted living facility she never agreed to. You wanted the house demolished and converted into luxury condominiums. You even toured the architect through the backyard while she was asleep. Calliope's mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. I stepped closer, not to threaten, but to conclude what had begun. "I'm not here to destroy you," I said. "I'm simply finished pretending. Finished playing the quiet one while you rewrite history in broad daylight." The cameras turned towards me. I didn't flinch. I didn't smirk. I simply stood there, truth in hand, the storm behind me. Silence fell again, but this time, it wasn't mine, it was hers. The older will, the one she had pressured Mom to sign during a feverish recovery. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Then came the tone that sliced through the air. "We are here to finalize the probate of the estate of the late Maeve Wainwright. We will hear both parties' evidence. Miss Calliope Wainwright, you may begin." Calliope cleared her throat. "Your Honor, this is my mother's legally recognized will, signed, witnessed, and notarized. I have submitted copies to the court and to opposing counsel." I didn't interrupt. "Not yet," she continued, in that sickeningly sweet tone she always employed when feigning innocence. "It names me the sole executor and heir of the estate, which I accepted not out of greed but responsibility. My sister, Odelinda, was not involved in Mom's care during her final year. She only appeared when the paperwork was completed. I'm afraid my mother was pressured, possibly manipulated." The courtroom buzzed. A few reporters began scribbling notes. The judge turned to me. "Miss Odelinda Wainwright, do you wish to respond?" "Dolores Wainwright and Genevieve Holloway." Notarized by state-certified notary Erica Plath. Calliope's composure cracked. She took a step forward. "She forged it. That's a fake." I didn't flinch. I simply turned towards the AV technician in the corner of the courtroom. "Could you please play the file?" The screen flickered. The judge gave a slight nod, and there she was. My mother, thinner than I remembered, but with a calmness in her eyes that silenced every breath in the room. "If this is ever played," she began softly, "it means Calliope has tried again to twist my intentions. I made another will because she attempted to place me in assisted care against my wishes. She contacted a realtor behind my back, and she withdrew over $8,000 without my permission. Odelinda didn't pressure me. She protected me. That's why everything is hers now, and it's what I wanted. Clearly, freely, and with full capacity." A cough broke the silence. I turned and saw Calliope frozen mid-step, her mouth agape, her eyes fixed on the screen as if it had betrayed her. The judge spoke firmly. "This confirms testamentary intent. I will accept the July 9th will as the operative document, unless there is irrefutable evidence of fraud, which, based on this footage and notary records, I do not see." Calliope's voice rose in pitch. She was dying. She didn't know what she was saying, but no one met her gaze. Not even the reporters. The judge turned to me. "Do you have anything else to submit?" I shook my head, simply stating that I loved my mother, and I respected her choices. In the front row, Aunt Dolores gave a slight nod, a silent vindication, and as the gavel fell, I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply stood tall, let her scream, let her deny. The truth no longer needed to shout. By the time we exited the courthouse, the sun had shifted westward, casting a soft golden light on the stone steps. I didn't need to turn around to know Calliope wasn't walking beside me. She had remained behind, hunched in the corner, as if the weight of her own lies had finally caught up with her. She didn't yell this time. She didn't even look at me. Just silence. Not the kind I had known growing up. The silence that had left me yearning for acknowledgement. No. This silence felt deserved, final. Like a page turning. Cameras flashed. Reporters called out my name. "Oh, Odelinda, will you comment? Did you anticipate the video playing in court? How long have you possessed the second will?" I didn't stop. I gave them what Mom would have called my weather face, the one I used during storms, funerals, and Sunday dinners when Calliope made another backhanded remark. I walked down the steps and found Romy waiting at the curb in her old Toyota, her hand already resting on the passenger door. She didn't speak initially. She simply looked at me, then at the courthouse, then back at me again, as if assessing whether I was truly all right, or merely holding myself together out of habit. "Ready?" she finally asked. "No," I replied. "But I'm done." The drive home was quiet, just the faint hum of tires on pavement and the occasional thump of my heartbeat in my throat. By the time we pulled into my driveway, dusk had arrived, that in-between hour where everything appears slightly softer yet feels more honest. I stepped out and inhaled deeply. Oak, dry grass, the faintest trace of the jasmine Mom had planted years ago. Inside, Romy followed me to the porch, then stopped just short of the screen door. She reached into her bag and produced something that stole my breath. A letter, singed at the edges, familiar. "I found it tucked inside the lining of your mother's old wallet," she said. "It didn't seem like something you'd want strangers rummaging through." I took it gently. The paper was creased and brittle, but the ink, her handwriting, was still there. The envelope was addressed simply, "To my youngest, my silent warrior." I didn't read it immediately. I sat on the swing first, allowing the cicadas to buzz in the distance, letting the quiet settle. Then I opened it. "You always were the strongest even when they pretended not to see. I hope one day you realize, you didn't need their praise to matter. Some truths aren't spoken, they're lived, and you lived it correctly. I love you. Always." Mom, it wasn't grand. It wasn't poetic, but it was everything I had never heard her say, aloud, and it arrived precisely when I no longer sought validation. Just peace. Romy brought out 2 glasses of iced tea. We didn't offer toasts. We didn't make speeches. She simply sat beside me as the sun disappeared behind the treetops, and the porch light flickered on as if it sensed the moment required quietude. I looked around at the chipped paint on the banister, the stubborn flower pot Calliope had always dismissed as too small town, the wind chimes that clinked like they were whispering instead of ringing, and I reflected upon all the birthdays I had spent waiting for someone to appear. All the report cards, the hospital visits, the solitary Christmas mornings, the constant waiting. But now, I didn't feel empty. I felt complete, in a quiet, steady way, because I was no longer living for their acknowledgement. I wasn't attempting to earn a seat at a table that had never been intended for me. I had created my own space on this porch, in this house, with this letter in my lap and a friend beside me. Calliope may never apologize. The family may always speak in hushed tones about what transpired. And perhaps